For 10 years, I saved $10,000 a month from my $50,000 salary. But one day, my daughter stole all my savings and flew to Europe with her husband. I just smirked. A week later, she called hysterically, "Mom, what did you do? We were arrested at the airport." My revenge was simple. Good day, dear listeners. It's Louisa again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. I want to start by telling you something people rarely admit out loud. I was proud of myself, not in a loud, boastful way, not the kind of pride that needs an audience. It was a quiet pride, the kind that lives in the chest, warm and steady, like a pilot light that never goes out. Every month for 10 years, I set aside $1,000. $1,000 from my secretary's salary at Dayton Central Middle School. A salary that left very little room for anything resembling luxury. I packed my own lunches. I bought my coats at the end of season sales. I drove a 2009 Honda Civic that had a crack in the dashboard and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. And every single month on the 15th, I transferred $1,000 into a savings account I had opened specifically for one purpose: to buy myself a small house near the lake in Michigan, where my husband Roy and I had honeymooned 34 years ago, before the cancer took him. Roy passed in 2013. After that, the house near the lake became more than a dream. It became a reason. By the spring of last year, I had $120,000 in that account. $120,000 built penny by penny, sacrifice by sacrifice, year by year. I told almost no one. My neighbor Ruth Ann knew, because Ruth Ann has known everything about my life since 1987, and there are no secrets between us. My financial advisor Gerald knew, obviously, and my daughter Denise knew, because I had made the mistake, the very human and very foolish mistake, of trusting her. Denise is 40 years old. She is beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful, sharply, almost aggressively, in a way that makes you feel slightly underdressed in her presence. She got Roy's cheekbones and none of his patience. She had been married to Tyrone for 6 years. Tyrone was charming, well-dressed, and chronically underemployed in ways that were always someone else's fault. When they first got together, I tried to like him. I genuinely did. But there is a particular kind of man who looks at an older woman's modest life and sees only what he can extract from it, and Tyrone was that kind of man. The first warning signs. I see them so clearly now, the way you always see things clearly in retrospect. It started about 8 months before everything happened. Denise began calling more often, which should have felt like a blessing, but instead felt like something else. Like a salesman calling to build rapport before the pitch. She asked questions she had never asked before. "How's the savings account coming along, Mom? You still with the same bank? Do you have Gerald's number? I might want to ask him something." Small questions, innocent-sounding questions. But they accumulated the way water accumulates, drop by drop, until one day you notice the floor is wet. Then there was the afternoon she came by the house, unannounced, which was unusual, and asked to use my computer because her phone was dead. She was at my desk for 20 minutes. I was in the kitchen making tea. I thought nothing of it. I should have thought something of it. The second warning sign came from Tyrone directly. We were at Denise's house for Easter dinner, and after the meal, when Denise had gone to the kitchen, he leaned across the table and said, very casually, "Maggie, you ever think about what happens to all that money if something happens to you?" I looked at him. He smiled. "Just thinking about planning," he said. "Family planning." I changed the subject. But that night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I didn't act. That is the thing I will carry with me forever. I didn't act on what I felt. I told myself I was being paranoid, that these were my own anxious thoughts, filling in shadows where there was only air. I told myself Denise was my daughter, my blood, the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap watching old musicals on Saturday nights, who cried at Roy's funeral so hard she could barely stand. I told myself a mother shouldn't think such things. And then, one Thursday morning in April, I logged into my bank account to schedule a payment for my car insurance, and I saw the balance. 0. Not low. Not reduced. 0. I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time without moving. The coffee went cold in the cup. The morning light moved across the linoleum floor. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard, and that ordinary sound, that completely ordinary, everyday sound, felt surreal, like something playing from another world. $120,000. Gone. I only allowed myself a small, quiet smile, because somewhere, underneath the shock, a part of me, the part that had been watching and waiting and not letting herself know what she already knew, was not surprised at all. And that part of me had already begun to think. I did not call Denise that morning. That is the first thing to understand about me. I have never been a woman who acts from raw emotion. Roy used to say I was the only person he knew who could be furious and still speak in complete sentences. He meant it as a compliment. I took it as one. What I did that Thursday morning, after I sat at the kitchen table long enough for the shock to settle into something I could work with, was get up, pour out the cold coffee, make a fresh cup, and sit back down with a legal pad and a pen. I wrote at the top of the page, "What do I know for certain?" I knew the account was empty. I knew the transfer, or transfers, had been made without my authorization. Or, more accurately, with an authorization that had been obtained by fraud. Because I had not transferred that money. I had not touched that account in 6 weeks, not since I had added another installment in March. Someone else had done this, and that someone had needed access. Access to my account number, my routing number, and almost certainly my online banking login credentials. My computer, Denise. 20 minutes while I made tea. I wrote her name on the legal pad. I stared at it. Then I wrote Tyrone's name beside it. The fear came then. Not the panic fear. Not the screaming kind. But the deep, cold, sickening fear that comes when you realize that someone you loved has chosen to hurt you deliberately. That is a different category of pain than any other. A stranger robbing you is terrible. A daughter robbing you is something that has no clean word for it in the English language, and probably no clean word in any language, because the people who build languages generally hope such things won't need naming. I allowed myself 10 minutes of that feeling. I set the kitchen timer, the little rooster timer Roy bought at a farmer's market in 2009, and I let myself feel it fully. The grief, the betrayal, the humiliation, the anger. I cried a little. Not much. When the timer went off, I wiped my face, turned the page on the legal pad, and wrote, "What can be done?" The first call I made was not to Denise. It was to Gerald. Gerald Marsh had been my financial advisor for 11 years. He was 65, meticulous, and had the energy of a man who genuinely enjoyed spreadsheets. He picked up on the second ring, and when I told him what had happened, calmly, with the legal pad in front of me so I would not lose my thread, there was a silence on his end that told me he understood exactly how serious this was. "Maggie," he said, "do not touch anything. Do not log into the account again. Do not call the bank yet. And please, do not contact Denise." "I wasn't planning to," I said. "I know a fraud attorney," he said. "Her name is Patricia Owens. She's in Columbus. I'm going to call her right now and have her call you within the hour." While I waited for Patricia's call, I did what Gerald had told me not to do, which was log into my account one more time. Not to touch anything, just to look. The transfer log showed 2 wire transfers, both made 4 days ago on a Sunday morning, both originating from an IP address I didn't recognize, both going to an account I had never seen before. 4 days ago. That meant that for 4 days, Denise and Tyrone had known that my life savings were sitting in their account, and they had said nothing. They had called me on Monday, in fact. Denise had called to ask if I wanted to come for dinner on Friday. She had sounded perfectly normal. Warm, even. I put the phone down very carefully, the way you put things down when you're afraid of what you might do if you're not deliberate about it. Patricia Owens called at 11:14 a.m. She was brisk, precise, and did not waste time on sympathy, which I found enormously comforting. She told me the first step was to file a report with my bank's fraud department. Not to reverse the transfer yet, but to initiate the investigation and create an official record. The second step was to file a police report. The third step was to contact the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, known as IC3, because wire fraud of this scale involving electronic access typically falls within federal jurisdiction. "Has she left the country?" Patricia asked. I paused. Denise had mentioned something last week, vaguely, in passing, about a trip. Europe, she'd said. A vacation. With Tyrone. "I believe she may be planning to," I said. "Then we need to move quickly," Patricia said. "Very quickly." I wrote that down on the legal pad. Move quickly. Then I underlined it twice. The plan was not complicated. It did not need to be complicated. The most effective plans rarely are. What it needed was documentation, patience, and an absolute refusal to let sentiment cloud judgment. I had all three. Roy had always said I was the most organized person he had ever met. I intended to prove him right, one final time. I picked up the phone and called the bank. The fraud department of Midwest Regional Bank was located, it turned out, not in a building I could walk into, but in a phone queue that played the same 4 bars of jazz on a loop for 22 minutes before connecting me to a man named Curtis. Curtis was thorough, if slow, and by the time we were done, I had a fraud case number, a hold placed on any further activity in the affected account, and an appointment with the branch manager for the following morning. I wrote the case number at the top of a fresh page on the legal pad. That evening, I drove to the Dayton Police Department on West 2nd Street, a building I had walked past hundreds of times in 30 years of living in this city and had never once entered. The officer who took my report was young, younger than Denise, with careful eyes and the efficient manner of someone trained to separate facts from emotion. I gave him facts. He gave me a case number and told me a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit would contact me within 48 hours. He also told me very gently that in cases involving family members and wire transfers, the outcomes varied significantly, depending on whether the funds were still accessible. His meaning was clear. The longer I waited, the more likely the money was to disappear entirely. I thanked him, drove home, and filed the IC3 complaint online at my kitchen table that night. Then I waited. In the meantime, the silence from my end was clearly registering somewhere. Denise called on Friday. The dinner invitation, the one she had extended so warmly while 4 days had already passed since the theft. I let it go to voicemail. She called again Saturday morning. I let that go too. On Saturday afternoon, a text arrived. "Mom, everything okay? You're being quiet." I read it, put the phone face down on the counter, and went back to organizing my documentation. I had built a folder by then, physical and digital, both. Bank statements, transfer records, a timeline I had reconstructed from memory and confirmed against my phone logs and email history, the approximate dates of Denise's visit when she had used my computer, the Easter dinner conversation with Tyrone about family planning, I had also, with Gerald's guidance, pulled up my online banking security log, which showed the login that had been used to initiate the transfers. Login that had originated from a device I did not own, at a time I had been at work. That was important. I had been at work. There were sign-in records, a time-stamped log at the school office. I called the school principal, my former colleague Bev, and asked her to preserve those records. She asked no questions. Bev has known me for 20 years. It was on Monday, 6 days after the transfers, that I received the call that moved everything from suspected to confirmed. The detective assigned to my case was a woman named Sharon Kowalski, and she called at 8:40 in the morning, just as I was pouring my coffee. She had been working over the weekend, she said, and she had traced the destination account. It was a joint account opened 14 months earlier, before the transfer, well before any emergency, in the names of Denise Marie Hollowell and Tyrone James Garrett. The account had been opened at a bank in New Jersey, though neither of them lived in New Jersey. The account had received both wire transfers and had then been used over the course of the following 48 hours to purchase 2 international plane tickets to Amsterdam, 1 international money transfer to a European account, and several other large expenditures. Mrs. Hollowell, Detective Kowalski said, I need to ask you directly. Did you authorize any of these transactions? I did not, I said. And you had no knowledge of this joint account? None whatsoever. There was a brief pause. Then I want you to know, she said, that we have sufficient grounds to proceed with felony charges: wire fraud, unauthorized account access, theft by deception. Given the amount and the method, this is a federal matter as well as a state one. I sat down, not from weakness, just because it seemed like the kind of moment that deserved to be received sitting down. 14 months. They had been planning this for 14 months. While Denise called me on holidays, while she came for Thanksgiving dinner and helped me wash the dishes afterward and kissed me on the cheek at the door. They had been planning this for 14 months. Mrs. Hollowell? Detective Kowalski's voice was careful. Are you all right? Yes, I said. And I meant it in the only way that mattered. What do we do next? She told me. I wrote it all down, every word. The call that I had been expecting came on a Tuesday. I had spent the previous several days moving through Patricia Owens's checklist with the methodical focus of someone dismantling a complicated piece of machinery. Carefully, piece by piece, making sure nothing was rushed and nothing was skipped. Patricia had filed the civil complaint. Detective Kowalski had formally escalated the case to the FBI field office in Cincinnati, where it had been assigned to an agent named David Reyes. Gerald had prepared documentation of my complete financial history with the savings account, showing 10 years of consistent monthly deposits, all originating from my salary, all entirely my own. And Interpol, or more precisely, a formal request transmitted through federal channels to Dutch authorities, had been notified that 2 individuals traveling on American passports might be of interest in connection with a wire fraud investigation. That last piece had been Patricia's idea, not mine, but I had approved it without hesitation. So when my phone rang that Tuesday afternoon and I saw Denise's name on the screen, I already knew what the call was going to sound like. I answered. What did you do? Her voice was a pitch I had never heard from her before. Cracked at the edges, disbelieving, cycling toward hysteria. Mom, what did you do? We were stopped at the airport, Schiphol. They detained us for 3 hours. They took our phones. They had a file. Mom, they had a file. Denise, I said. Tyrone is furious. He's saying you've destroyed everything. We had plans. You can't do this. You can't just call the police on your own daughter. Denise. My voice was calm. I had practiced this calmness, not performance, genuine calmness, the kind that comes from having already decided. You took $120,000 from my account without my knowledge or consent. You transferred it using credentials you obtained by accessing my computer without permission. This is a matter of federal law now. It is no longer a family conversation. The silence that followed was long enough to be its own answer. Then Tyrone's voice came on the line. He had taken the phone. His tone was entirely different from Denise's, low, controlled, with an edge of something I recognized as a man who had backed people into corners before and knew how to make the backing feel like their fault. "Maggie," he said, "you need to think very carefully about what you're doing. Denise is your daughter. You want to put your own daughter in handcuffs? You want that on your conscience?" "What I want," I said, "is my money returned and the people who took it held accountable. Those two things are not incompatible." "If you don't drop this," he said, and here his voice dropped further, into something quieter and therefore more deliberate, "we will tell people things about you, about your mental state, about how you gave Denise that money voluntarily, and now you're confused about it. Dementia runs in families, Maggie. People will wonder." I had expected this. Patricia had warned me this type of response was common in family fraud cases, the pivot to the victim's credibility. I had documentation. I had a medical clearance from my physician dated the previous November. I had 10 years of bank records showing consistent, rational financial behavior. I had witnesses. "That approach," I said, "will not go well for you." I ended the call. My hands, I noticed, were perfectly steady. 2 days later, Denise called again, this time crying, not angry, and told me that if I continued, I would lose her forever. I told her, gently but without apology, that she had made that choice when she made those transfers. She hung up. I will not pretend that those days were easy. They were not. I sat with the weight of it every evening, the particular loneliness of doing something right that feels terrible anyway. I planted the tomatoes I had been planning to plant since March. I had Ruth Ann over for dinner twice. I slept more than I had slept in months, the deep sleep of someone who has stopped waiting for something and started moving toward it instead. By Friday, I felt ready to continue. They sent an email, not a call this time. An email, which told me something. A phone call can be denied, contested, misremembered. An email leaves a record, which meant either they didn't realize that, or they had decided to shift strategy in a way they believed was untraceable. Either way, Patricia Owens received a forwarded copy within 20 minutes of my receiving it. The email was from Denise's address, but read, in its careful flatness, like something Tyrone had composed. It offered, in language dressed up in the vocabulary of reconciliation, to return $70,000, not all of it, $70,000, in exchange for a written statement from me confirming that the transfers had been authorized, and a formal request to Detective Kowalski and the FBI to close the investigation on the grounds of family misunderstanding. $70,000 out of 120. They were keeping $50,000 and calling it a settlement. I read the email twice, set my coffee down, and typed a 3-sentence reply. "I have forwarded this correspondence to my attorney, Patricia Owens, and to Detective Sharon Kowalski of the Dayton PD Financial Crimes Unit, as it constitutes an attempt to obstruct an ongoing investigation. I will not be signing any statement. No further direct communication should be sent to me. Please direct all correspondence through my legal counsel." I pressed send. Then I went outside and watered the tomatoes. The thing about cold calm is that people often mistake it for detachment, for not caring. I cared enormously. Every morning I woke up and felt the full weight of what this was. Not just stolen money, but stolen trust. stolen years. The specific grief of discovering that someone you raised and loved had looked at you and seen a resource to be depleted. That grief did not go away. But I had decided, somewhere in that week after the discovery, that I was not going to let it make my decisions for me. Ruth Ann was my first support. She came over the Thursday after the email and sat at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea and listened to everything. The full timeline, from the Easter dinner to the current email. Ruth Ann is not a dramatic woman. She said, when I finished, "Maggie, you are the most sensible person I have ever known, and I am very glad you are not going to let them get away with this." Then she asked if I needed her to come to any of the legal meetings as a character witness, and I told her that might well be necessary, and she said, "Good, I've been practicing." The second source of support came, unexpectedly, from the church, not from the institution, but from the Women's Tuesday morning group I had attended intermittently for years. I did not tell them the specifics, just the outline, that I was going through a serious legal matter involving a family member and that I was all right, but would appreciate their company. What I received in return was exactly what I needed. Not advice, not opinions, just presence. Casseroles left on the porch. Texts that asked nothing but offered everything. The particular warmth of people who have learned through their own difficulties not to turn support into interrogation. The third and perhaps most practically significant support came from an unexpected source, a woman in her 50s named Carol, who attended the same Tuesday group and who turned out, in the way life occasionally arranges such things, to be a retired federal prosecutor. We had coffee after the group meeting. I told her more than I had told anyone else, excluding Patricia. She listened carefully, asked 3 pointed questions, and then said, "Your attorney's doing everything right. But make sure the Interpol notification included documentation of the fraudulent account opening. The one in New Jersey 14 months ago. That premeditation is your strongest card." I went home and emailed Patricia that afternoon. Patricia called back within the hour. "Already in the file," she said, and I could hear the quiet satisfaction in her voice. "But good instinct." I hung up, sat at Roy's old desk by the window, and watched the evening settle over the backyard. The tomatoes were coming in nicely. The neighbor's dog was quiet. The rooster timer on the kitchen counter said it was almost 6. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that was almost cautiously like peace. They showed up on a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen making oatmeal when I heard the car in the driveway. A rental, I noticed through the curtain, which meant they were back from Europe or had never fully left, and either fact told its own story. I watched Denise get out of the passenger side. She was dressed carefully. Not the aggressive put-together of her usual self, but softer, more considered. A pale blue cardigan that I recognized as a deliberate choice. She carried flowers. Grocery store sunflowers, wrapped in cellophane. Tyrone followed, hands in his pockets, face arranged in an expression of rueful humility that did not reach his eyes. I turned off the stove and stood for a moment in the middle of my kitchen. I had 2 choices. I could not answer the door, which was my legal right and probably the cleaner option. Or I could open it, keep my phone in my hand with the record function running, and let them demonstrate exactly who they were. Patricia had told me not to meet with them alone. But Patricia had also said, with a lawyer's careful neutrality, that if they were to say anything incriminating in my presence, that would be not unhelpful. I went to the door. Denise looked at me with an expression I had seen on her face since she was 7 years old. The look she deployed when she had done something wrong and was calculating the fastest route back to being forgiven. It had always worked when she was 7. It did not work now. "Mom," she said, "please, can we just talk?" I held the door open. They came in. I remained standing. I did not offer tea. Tyrone opened. He was always the strategist between them. He said that this had all gone too far, that they had made a terrible mistake, that they fully intended to return the money, no mention of how much, and wanted the chance to make things right as a family. He used the word family 6 times in 4 minutes. I counted. He spoke about fresh starts, about how the legal system turns personal mistakes into permanent records, about how everyone involved. And here he paused, as though out of consideration for me, stood to lose something irreplaceable if this continued any further. His voice was measured, reasonable, the voice of a man who had learned that presenting cruelty in the language of pragmatism made it harder to name. Then Denise spoke, and her approach was different, softer, and in some ways more dangerous, because she knew me better than Tyrone did. She talked about her father. She said that Roy would have wanted us to work this out between ourselves. She said the legal system was cold and impersonal, and that dragging family through it would leave scars that couldn't be undone. Her eyes filled with tears. Real ones, possibly. I did not find that relevant. She reached across and touched my hand. I did not pull away, but I did not return the pressure. I let her hand rest on mine the way you let weather happen, noting it without being changed by it. "Mom," she said quietly, "you could drop this today and have us back, or you could keep going and lose us forever. Those are the only 2 choices." I looked at my daughter for a long moment. "That framing," I said, "is incorrect. You removed the other choices when you planned this for 14 months and executed it while wishing me a happy Easter." The temperature in the room changed. Tyrone dropped the humility. It happened quickly, the way a mask doesn't fall so much as get pulled. One motion, deliberate. His voice went flat. "You're an old woman living alone," he said. "You don't have any idea what we're capable of. You think this is just about money? We can make your life very difficult. The story we tell about you, about your memory, about what you've been like since Roy died, about the things you've done that people don't know about. That story will travel faster than any court filing." I raised my phone slightly. "I should let you know," I said, "that I've been recording this conversation." The silence that followed was extraordinary. Denise looked at Tyrone. Tyrone looked at me. And in that exchange, that half-second of recalibration, I saw the thing I had needed to see. Not anger, not bravado, but the particular cold calculation of people who had just realized that the wrong move had been made. Not remorse. Pure tactical adjustment. Denise's hand, which had been resting on mine, withdrew slowly. She did not look at me as it did. "This conversation is over," Tyrone said. They left. The sunflowers sat on the counter in their cellophane, and I looked at them for a while before dropping them in the recycling bin. I will not claim I felt nothing after they drove away. There was fear. Specific. Physical. The kind that settles in the shoulders and the jaw. These were not people who responded to consequences by becoming smaller. Tyrone's threat had been real, even if it was hollow as a legal matter. There are ways to make a person's life unpleasant that don't require legal standing, and we both knew it. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the rental car disappear around the corner at the end of my street. I did not move until it was entirely gone. But the fear, I found, had an unexpected quality. It clarified things. It burned off any remaining ambiguity about what this was and who these people were. You do not threaten a grieving widow in her own kitchen over the money she spent a decade saving. Not unless you have already decided that her dignity, her grief, her years of quiet sacrifice meant nothing to you from the beginning. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. "They came here," I said. "I have a recording." There was a pause. Then, "Maggie," Patricia said with something that was almost warmth, "that is very, very helpful. The federal hearing was not what movies prepare you for. There was no dramatic courtroom with high ceilings and a gallery of spectators. It was a conference room in the federal building on West 3rd Street. Gray carpet, fluorescent light, a rectangular table with too many people on one side of it and not enough on the other. Agent Reyes was there. Patricia was there. A federal prosecutor named Marcus Webb, 38 years old, who had reviewed every piece of documentation in our file with the focused energy of a man who had been lied to before and had learned to find the evidence first. Detective Kowalski attended by video call, and across the table, Denise and Tyrone, with their attorney, a man named Greenberg, who had the overconfident bearing of someone who had not yet fully reviewed what he was up against. I wore my gray blazer. Roy had always said it made me look like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I arrived 15 minutes early. I sat in the hallway outside the conference room on a vinyl chair and reviewed my notes. Not because I needed to, but because the act of reviewing them settled something in me, confirmed that what I was carrying into that room was not emotion dressed up as evidence, but evidence. Full stop. Patricia sat beside me and said nothing, which was exactly right. Some moments do not need commentary. The hearing was a pre-indictment proceeding, the final formal opportunity for Denise and Tyrone to present any counter-narrative before charges were formally filed. Greenberg had clearly advised them to appear cooperative, perhaps to offer a version of events that introduced doubt. What he had not adequately accounted for was the documentation. Marcus Webb began by laying it out, piece by piece, in the flat, procedural language of federal law. The 10-year savings record, the unauthorized login, the destination account opened 14 months prior in New Jersey, the wire transfers, the international tickets purchased within 48 hours, the email offering a partial return in exchange for a false statement, and the recording. Greenberg had not known about the recording. He asked for a recess to consult with his clients. Webb gave him 10 minutes. I stepped into the hallway while they conferred. Through the glass panel beside the conference room door, I could see Tyrone leaning toward Greenberg, speaking in a low, tight voice. Greenberg's posture had changed. He sat differently than he had an hour ago. More inward, less expansive. He was a man recalculating. Denise sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the table, and I noticed, because I had spent 40 years watching her face, that she was not crying. She was somewhere further away than crying. When they returned, something had shifted in the room. Not broken, not yet, but loosened, the way a structure loosens before it gives. Tyrone was sitting differently, forward rather than back, and his hands, which had been still and controlled in the first half of the meeting, were moving. The version of events they offered was this: that I had, in a conversation 2 years ago, offered Denise a portion of my savings as an informal gift to help her and Tyrone start over in Europe, that the transfer method had been clumsy but well-intentioned, that there had been a misunderstanding about the amount, and that they had every intention of clarifying with me before leaving. The partial return offer, they said, had been a gesture of good faith. Webb waited until Greenberg finished speaking. Then he placed 3 documents on the table. The first was a printout of my bank security log showing the unauthorized device login on a Sunday morning at 9:42 a.m. The same Sunday, I had verified, through the school's attendance system, that I was physically present at a faculty volunteer event. The second was Denise's phone records, which showed a call to a wire transfer service from her cell phone at 9:58 a.m. that same Sunday morning, 16 minutes after the login. The third was an internal chat log, obtained legally through the fraud investigation between Denise and Tyrone, dating back 11 months. I had not seen this before. Patricia had, and had chosen not to show it to me in advance. She said later that she didn't want it to affect my composure in the room. She was right to wait. The chat log was specific. It referenced the account balance. They had checked it multiple times over months, watching it grow, calculating. It referenced the plan to access the credentials during the computer visit. It referenced the timing around the European account setup. And this was the detail that landed in the room like something dropped from a height. A message from Tyrone to Denise, sent 3 days before the transfers, that read, "She won't do anything. She's too soft. And even if she does, we'll be gone." Beneath it, Denise's reply, a single word, "Exactly." Denise made a sound. Not a word, just a sound, and put her hand over her mouth. Tyrone went very still. I looked at them both and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. The documents were saying it. The timeline was saying it. 11 months of planning and one message of contempt were saying it, with more precision and permanence than anything that could come from my mouth. I thought of Roy's desk, the legal pad, the rooster timer, the coffee gone cold. I thought of every morning I had packed my own lunch and deferred the coat and transferred the $1,000 with the steadiness of someone who believed the future was worth building. All of it was in that room now, documented and dated and irrefutable. Marcus Webb looked at Greenberg. "Would your clients like to revise their account of events?" Greenberg conferred in a whisper. Tyrone's jaw was tight. He said something short and sharp that I could not hear, and Greenberg straightened and said that his clients would need time to consult before making any further statements. "Of course," Webb said. Tyrone looked at me then. Directly, for the first time since the hearing began. I do not know what he expected to see. Triumph, perhaps, or anger, or the satisfaction of victory. What I gave him instead was simply a level, steady gaze. The gaze of a woman who had sat at a kitchen table with a legal pad and a rooster timer, and decided that she was not going to be dismissed. He looked away first. Federal wire fraud carries a sentence of up to 20 years. They did not receive 20 years. The system does not work in satisfying round numbers. Patricia had prepared me for this. And the actual outcome was shaped by negotiations I was not fully party to, the kind of procedural architecture that exists to manage courtroom resources and ensure cooperation. What I was party to was the result. Tyrone pleaded guilty to 2 counts of federal wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit computer fraud. He received 42 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay full restitution, $120,000, plus legal fees and court costs. The restitution was attached to any and all assets, present and future. There was no escaping it through bankruptcy or creative accounting. Patricia had made sure of that. She had also, I learned afterward, specifically requested the asset attachment provision after researching Tyrone's financial history and finding a pattern of moving money between accounts in ways that suggested prior practice. She had not mentioned this to me at the time. She mentioned it afterward, over coffee, with the contained satisfaction of someone who does good work quietly. Denise. And this was the hardest thing, the thing that required me to sit very still and breathe through. Denise accepted a plea agreement. She pled guilty to 1 count of wire fraud, cooperated fully with the prosecution against Tyrone, and received 36 months of probation, a substantial fine, and 200 hours of community service. She avoided prison by a margin that I was told was not guaranteed at the start. Her cooperation and her lack of prior criminal record had been factors. I did not attend the sentencing. Patricia had advised me on the practical reasons not to, but beyond those, I had made the decision for my own reasons. I had done what I needed to do. I did not need to watch. I spent that morning at the lake, a lake near Dayton, not the Michigan lake, just a public park near the reservoir where I sometimes walked when I needed to think without walls around me. I sat on a bench and drank coffee from a thermos and watched two ducks move in unhurried circles near the bank. There was a small child throwing bread at them, supervised by a grandfather who kept a hand lightly on the child's shoulder. I watched them for a while. Then I looked at the water and let the morning be what it was. Ordinary, quiet, and mine. What I did do when Patricia called to confirm it was over was drive to Ruth Ann's house and knock on her door, and when she opened it, I stood on her porch in the afternoon sun and said, "It's done." Ruth Ann looked at me for a moment, and then she held out her arms, and I stepped forward, and I cried. Really cried, not the careful, controlled tears of the kitchen timer, but the deep, releasing kind. For Roy, for the years, for the daughter I had wanted her to be, and the woman she had chosen to be instead. Then Ruth Ann made sandwiches, and we sat on her porch until the light went. The money was returned over the following months through the restitution process. Not all at once. These things never resolve all at once, but steadily, reliably, in the manner of a system that had, once properly engaged, worked exactly as it was designed to work. Gerald reinvested it. The account was rebuilt not to zero, but to a foundation, and from there, with the careful additions I continued to make, it grew. Patricia sent me a handwritten note after the final restitution payment cleared. It said, "You were the best client I've had in 20 years, not because of the case, because you never lost your head." I put it on the refrigerator next to a photo of Roy at the Michigan lake, squinting into the summer sun with that expression he had. Half happy, half wondering what would come next. There is a question people ask when they hear a story like this that I want to address honestly. Did I feel guilty? About pursuing it? About the sentence? About the record Denise would carry? Yes, I did. There were nights when the guilt sat heavily, when I turned over the what-ifs in the dark. What if I had caught it earlier? What if I had confronted Denise at Easter? What if some other version of events had been possible? But guilt and correctness are not opposites. You can feel both at once. What I could not do, what I refused to do, was let the guilt make the decision instead of me. That would have been its own kind of defeat, not just of the legal case, but of the principle that a person's life work deserves to be defended. What would come next, as it turned out, was the lake house. I began looking at properties in the spring. I found the house in June. A small white clapboard house on a quiet road near Torch Lake, with a screened porch and a yard that had once had a garden and needed one again. The asking price was within my reach. The inspection came back clean. I made an offer on a Thursday afternoon, sitting at Roy's old desk by the window, and by Friday morning it had been accepted. I signed the papers on a sunny morning in July. The notary, an older man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, watched me sign and said, "You seem very calm about this." "I've been working toward it for a while," I said. "How long?" I thought about the legal pad, the rooster timer, the coffee gone cold, the balance that read 0. 11 years, I said, give or take. The lake house in summer smelled the way I had imagined it would, like cedar and water and something green that I couldn't name but recognized. I sat on the screened porch every morning with coffee and watched the light come up over the water, and I thought about Roy, and I let myself feel the fullness of the fact that I was here, that I had made it here, that no one had taken this from me. The first morning I woke up in that house, I lay still for a moment before opening my eyes, the way you do when you're not sure yet if the good thing is real. The birds were already at it outside, a particular Michigan morning sound, dense and layered. And the light through the curtains was the pale gold of early summer. I opened my eyes. The cedar ceiling. The window I had already decided to keep unobstructed on the lakeside. The small wooden nightstand where Roy's photograph now sat, him squinting into the Michigan sun. I said good morning to it because there was no one around to find that strange and because it felt right. Then I got up and made coffee and went to the porch and watched the water. And that became the shape of my mornings. Ruth Ann came to visit in August and declared the garden inadequate and spent 3 days fixing it. She planted lavender along the front walk and tomatoes along the south fence and stood back and said, "There. Now it looks like someone who deserves a garden lives here." I told her she was ridiculous and meant it as the highest compliment. On her last evening, we sat on the porch after dinner with wine and listened to the water and didn't talk much, which is the mark of a friendship that has earned its silences. I joined a kayaking group in the area, a Wednesday morning gathering of mostly older adults who paddled the lake in a loose formation and stopped for coffee afterward at a small diner near the water. I was not the oldest or the youngest. I was, I found, simply myself, a woman with strong arms and a reliable stroke and a great deal of accumulated patience for sitting with silence. The group's organizer, a widower named Frank who taught woodworking at the local community college, told me after the 3rd week that I was a natural. "I've been practicing for a while," I said. The kayaking became the Wednesday anchor of my week. I also found a library in town with a good large print section and a Tuesday volunteer program that needed help. The librarian, a young woman named Sasha, with ink-stained fingers, told me on my first day that she could tell within a week whether I'd love it or find it boring. Within a week, she had given me my own shelf to manage. I managed it with the same methodical care I had given everything worth keeping. I did not spend much time thinking about Denise. I want to be honest about that. Not the absence of pain, because the pain was real and it visited me in the way losses do, quietly and at unexpected angles, but the absence of obsession. I had processed what needed to be processed in the slow, unglamorous way that real things are processed, not in one cathartic moment, but in the accumulation of ordinary days. What I knew of Denise and Tyrone's circumstances came to me through indirect channels, not sought, just unavoidable in the way that information travels in small worlds. Tyrone began serving his sentence in November at a minimum security federal facility in Pennsylvania. His family in Georgia went conspicuously silent after the sentencing. The social media presence he had maintained, the curated photographs of restaurants and airports, the performance of a life larger than its means, went dark within a week and did not return. Denise's probation required regular check-ins, community service hours, and restricted travel. She could not leave the country for 3 years. The European life, whatever vision had been assembled from my savings, whatever imagined version of themselves they had been willing to steal to access, was gone. I heard she had moved back to the Dayton area, to a small apartment near where she had grown up, working a retail job with steady hours and modest pay. I thought about that sometimes, not with satisfaction, but with the particular sorrow of watching a person arrive at the life they might have built honestly, through the back door of consequence instead. I did not reach out. She did not reach out either. Perhaps someday that silence will be broken. I had stopped trying to predict which future would arrive and learned instead to tend the present one. There is a particular kind of reckoning that comes not from punishment, but from consequence. They had taken what they thought would give them freedom and had received instead a smaller life than the one they had before. It was the arithmetic of what they had chosen, adding up in the way that choices eventually do. Carol, the retired prosecutor from the Tuesday group, sent me a text in the fall. Heard it all worked out. Good. 2 words from someone who had seen enough of these cases to know that 2 words were sufficient. Gerald called to say the account had fully recovered and suggested a modest reallocation for the long term. I told him to proceed. Bev from the school sent a card. We miss you. The new secretary files everything wrong. I wrote back, telling her I was deeply sorry to hear it. And Frank asked me one October morning, as we pulled boats out of the water, if I might want to come see the furniture he was building. A dining table of white oak, fitted together without nails. We had coffee in his workshop afterward, sawdust still in the air, and he showed me the table's joinery. Interlocking pieces, each shaped to receive the other, holding together through precision of fit rather than external fastening. Stronger than nails, he said. I believe it, I said. The lake surface was flat that afternoon, gray-silver, and absolutely still. I sat on the workshop step and thought about the word enough, not as resignation, but as arrival. The thing you feel when you have stopped running toward something and realized you are already standing in it. I thought, Roy would have liked it here. And then, I like it here. And that was enough. 11 years of savings, 10 minutes at a computer, and a daughter who believed the word soft was the same as the word powerless. She was wrong. Here is what I learned. Document everything, trust your instincts, and never confuse a quiet woman with a defeated one. The law is not fast, but it is thorough. If you give it what it needs. What would you have done in my place? Would you have let it go for the sake of family, for the sake of peace? Leave your answer below, and if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs it. Thank you for listening.